Hello, hello. I am Sinner, and I am back with another book review. This book review is of The Managerial Revolution by one James Burnham. Now, this is basically the sequel, you could say, to The Machiavellian's Defenders of Freedom. Um, the Machiavellian's Defenders of Freedom is a book covering elite theory. And then the managerial revolution is applied elite theory in regards to America and the direction it's going, as well as the modern world. And it makes some very strange and bold claims, some of which didn't really turn out to be true, and some of which kind of did turn out to be true. I think the main cause as to why some of his predictions were wrong, which I'll get into later, is because of the fact that he was a former Trotskyist, and I think that sort of tainted some of his assumptions about capitalism. So what is the book about? The book is about the revolution that took place in the 40s, apparently. And this revolution was a transition away from capitalism and to a new form or organization of society. Instead of it being based around private owners, it was based around managers and bureaucrats, so to speak, who controlled the industry and the government, and led to this new change in society, which ultimately didn't really go the way he predicted it. So he first starts off by talking about feudalism and how feudalist society over time slowly gave way to capitalist society. And he makes the argument, some of the artisans, some of the lords, who intended on becoming, more established in their positions, eventually led to the intellectual and social movements, intentional or not, that created capitalism. And there's some interesting overlap with his analysis with that of like the servile state by Hilaire Belloc, which I thought was kind of interesting. But that's for a different day. So when it comes to what happens, well, now this is like the 40s. We were in a capitalist system that was changing to a managerial system. And the argument basically was that the capitalists who run society, and for all intents and purposes run the government, because most politicians are serving the interests of capitalists, have failed in being able to perpetuate the status quo. People no longer are willing to fight and die in wars for capitalism or capitalist slogans. Capitalists themselves have increasingly given up more and more of their, what would you say, their authority and their action in running their businesses, and they've delegated more and more to managers, and the managers are now the ones really running the businesses, while the capitalists, go and hang out on their yacht or whatever, do other stuff. So the capitalists have sort of stepped away from ruling society, and naturally that's leading to managerial society. The people below the capitalists who actually run the factories, who actually, the bureaucrats in government who actually run the government, these guys are the ones who are in control effectively, because the capitalists are no longer intervening or trying to control things. So now they're practically out of commission, and what's going to happen is the managers are going to, over time, use their position of authority to get more power and more control. And the examples that he gives, and remember he's writing in the early 1940s, is the new managerial societies that have appeared in Europe, which is the socialist, Soviet system, and uh, the fascist system, where you have bureaucrats and the government directing industry, and you have these managers who are controlling everything. And he sort of says that a lot of the mistakes that socialists make has been this assumption that, and same with capitalists, the assumption that, oh, the only two economic systems that we could ever live under are capitalism or socialism. That's it. And he's like, well, no, that you could have a managerial system. It's not limited to this false binary, which I think is true. But he, the reason that he, and this is something that I want to critique, is the reason that he thinks that it's like guaranteed that capitalism is never going to work in the long run is because of the fact that um, he basically just assumes that capitalism is always working on borrowed time, and he levies a lot of communist critiques at capitalism, and like, oh, it's inefficient because it has a profit motive, and managerial society, which is when you have the state running everything, because there's no profit incentive, it's magically going to be more efficient. And looking back on history, that's just not the case. Um, it's way less efficient because there's no incentive to be efficient. Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia were both inefficient systems. Um, so there's a lot of problems like that you know you can tell really when you read the book that the first book was purely elite theory, but his Trotskyist heritage, James Burnham's Trotskyist heritage, has sort of um, shown itself in the second book. And I think for that reason, a lot of the stuff's like, you know, again, like the example before. Um, and yeah, he thinks that New Dealism, or Roosevelt with the New Deal during World War II, the third term, all of this sort of stuff was leading towards a more managerial society. And I think this is going to be my critique of it. I think what's actually happened historically is there has been a increase in power of the managers, both in the public and private sector. A lot of the uh, capitalist, there's not really many companies that are run by the CEO these days. It's mainly boards of directors and these sorts of things, which have the real power. Like CEOs can come and go, like for example, with United Health, after Luigi Mangione was killed, the United Health CEO, they got in a new CEO, and this guy did some reforms to make United Health less. They started giving out way more, you know, way more money, and then he got fired. And CEOs get fired all the time now. It's very, very common for a CEO to get fired, or for the owner of a business to be kicked out by the board of directors. The only like real capitalist left I can really think of would be like Elon Musk. But most other companies are not run like how Elon Musk runs Tesla. So yeah, yeah, that he is right in that aspect, that like the managers have way more power now. But he made this assumption that because the managers have more power, that's immediately going to make everything state directed and government directed, which didn't happen. The vast majority, I mean, in Australia, there has been a dramatic rise in, government spending as a percentage of GDP. I think it's 20 something percent now, or over a quarter. But uh, yeah, still, it's not government led, and I think the reason is because basically is government even today burns more money than it makes. that's just a fact. And profit or whatever is like money is a representation of wealth. So if you don't have a profit or you're not breaking even, then that means that you're losing wealth. And it doesn't matter if you don't have a profit incentive, that might work for like a short term period, like a couple years. And that's what you saw in World War II, right? Like the Nazis and the Nazis went into heaps of debt to fund the war, but in reality they couldn't have perpetuated the war, you know, for very long because their whole system was based around conquering new territory to get more gold to then put themselves in more debt, and then that debt can fund it for another few more years while they conquer more territory. It was a very bad system. But what seems to be the case now is that the public system, the public sector, can only grow so large because the fact of the matter is the government is inefficient, and it has sort of a parasitic relationship with the private sector, which is profiting. So it can only like sap so much wealth away before the economy just starts to be hurt. And the this idea that like, oh well, it's more efficient is not really panning out. I think what you're going to see is that you have this, like, this is my opinion, is what's happened. Instead of it being just the managers, or in the public sector, you have like the managers and the bourgeoisie like forming this like pseudo alliance where they can the bourgeoisie can have their monopolies or oligopolies secured through the government, and the government and the managers get more power thanks to more regulation and more control. And so for example, if you're a small business or you're whoever, you have these managers and everyone who control and manage you, but at the same time, that managing of you makes it very hard for you to become a competitor to the status quo. And that's the actual situation we're in. So overall, it was an interesting book. I don't think it was as good as his first book, but that's okay. You can't expect it to be perfect. Um, oh, another thing, he thought that the world would be like like there'd be three superpowers, which would be like an Asiatic superpower, a European superpower, and a North American superpower. And he thought that these three would be like these like centers for conflict because they all the three superpowers would super states would compete with each other. That didn't play out. Basically, what we live in now is Europe is a vassal of the American Empire, and instead of Japan, which is what he thought would be the case, Japan being the center of like the Asiatic world, it's now China. So there are two superpowers, China and America, and Europe is like this lagging third vassal state of America. Um, so not quite, what he predicted. Um, yeah, and he was very smug in the book as well, and it was very. I think some of his retorts to critiques was very, very silly. Like, um, it was brought up that like, oh well, capitalists critique the managerial or like the socialist systems because they're inefficient. They are, in terms of money, inefficient. And then James Burnham says something along the lines of like, oh well, they're only inefficient according to capitalist dogma, you know. And it's like, no, they're just inefficient. Okay, like it'd be like, it'd be like saying like, oh, I don't know, a left-wing person said that Trump had these flaws, and then Trump going, but that's only a flaw because you're a left winger. It's like, that's not a retort of the critique. That doesn't disprove it. And he does that a lot. He's sort of just like, because he has this another thing which is a problem. He has an erroneous view that all ideology or all systems of belief are somehow like uh, post hoc, posthumous rationalizations of like uh, you know pre his worldview. I'll put it this way, is that you come to a belief, and then after you've had that belief, you then work back and justify the belief, not the other way around. And I think that's the case some of the time, but he uses it as if it's the case all of the time, which I mean is kind of silly because that means your own belief is like that, and you believe that your political theory is scientific. So how does that work? But yeah, overall, interesting book. I'm glad I read it. It wasn't as good as the first book, but yeah, there you go. That's my review. I'm Sinner. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.